As for the classic sounds, obviously we mentioned that we've remastered a few of them. I think the most famous ones, obviously, we've got a rock and roll piano for the famous. We've also got a couple of chimes for the wedding bells, which is for Brad and Janet's wedding. We've got a brass fanfare. I think what was really tricky about this one is, I think the B-movie excitement of this show is that it never sounds completely like a brass section. It needs to sound slightly like a keyboard. But we've added some reverb and some strings and some sounds to mix it in to make it sound as full as possible, but also still sounding like a keyboard, which we found really important. We've got the cathedral organ, which is the big bit when they go to bed. We've got a honky-tonk piano, which is quite famous. We've also got a jazz organ, a little gospel organ for the Startins Ready's Teddy, which is quite famous. We have the big one, which is the elbow sex patch, which is our sort of space string low drone sound, where we've mixed quite a lot into it. But when we come back to it, when the spaceship first goes, we found a sound on this keyboard that sounds like a rocket launch in sort of musical form, which sort of pans around the auditorium whilst we still got. So we have it all going at the same time. So that's all really good. And that's it really. I mean, the other stuff that we did talk about, which is I think new to this version, is we've now got about 4 or 5 different pianos as well. So you've heard the rock and roll piano, which sort of cuts through, and for me it feels like you're playing it like a rock and roll piano. You're like nearly in a pub, you just sort of whack it out. And there's also a slight effect on it where if you press, I don't know whether you will be able to hear it, but if you press the sustain pedal, it's got a sound with it, so it sounds like a real sustain pedal going as well. We've also got piano with an EP, which has a bit more depth to it. We've got a more close to a Steinway, but a sort of fuller grand piano to feel a bit more real. We've got a pop piano, which really cuts through. We've really mixed the brightness out of this. And then we've also, for the final scene of it, we've added quite a reverb piano. Which just adds such a different feel to everything. And it might be such a specific sound and such a slight difference, but I think for our show it's lifted it in a way that it still feels live, but it just gives it just a tiny bit more brightness and energy to it in a way that feels even more live. I think we couldn't have 5 different pianos up here, and that helps us do it. But it also makes me play in a reactionary way to how that piano would probably be, which is better for my fingers, better for my my posture, better for my musicality. So for me as a pianist, it's much more useful as well. So when we start the show, we has a generic screen here. And we can go to a setlist screen where you can preload whatever setlist you've made. For this show, we've made the Rocky Horror setlist. So we basically simply click that, press OK, and the screen will come up for the show. Then each screen is set up to patches of 16, and you can move through in bulks like this, but we simply just move by patch to patch. We've remastered this show in the way that actually all the patches now are in order from the start to the end of the show. So we'd start with our warm-up piano, and then we move on to patch 1, which correlates to our score. And then we just go from patch 1 to 68. It's pretty simple where we've just got a Boss switch pedal down here, so when we're ready to move to the next sound, as it says in our score, onto sound 2 or sound 3, we just press next and it'll go on to it one by one as we go through. What's really great about this is actually it won't cut out any of the last sound as you move on to the next one. So for an example, moving on the rock and roll piano, we can be... without it cutting out. We can be on brass, change, go a completely different sound without it cutting into it. obviously, every now and again, we can get slightly excited and maybe double tap and we're at one patch ahead. It's pretty simple. We've got a plus and a minus here, and we can just go back to wherever we need to be. And in the same way, if we're teching the show where we sort of go back and forth, it's very easy to go back and forward. Or it's also touchscreen, so we can just touch it that way, which is nice and easy. Once we get to the end of this, all we simply do is end the show, turn the keyboard off, give it a bit of time to warm down, and then start again the next day. Pretty easy. We added one thing we did do is we added a saw synth over the piano for the start of Sword of Damocles. It's the first time we see Rocky Horror and his entitlement used to use style on the piano. We want to bring something a bit more outworldly to it. So which again, I think it's just lifted it in a way which the audience understand it story-wise why it's there, but it's never been there before.
So many people's first experience of theatre is sitting at the front row, looking into the pit, seeing the band play, watching the musical director take his place, seeing the little green flashing light, and suddenly it all starts. There's no doubt that when you take that away, you lose some of the magic. There's also the element that when you're watching actors on stage, you never see exactly the same thing. It should be the same for musicians. When you're listening to musicians on stage, you should never hear the same thing. There are all sorts of influences which make a difference on the way we play things. In a show like this, we stand up and take our bow at the end. The audience go wild. The music is such an important part of the show, and they've seen it performed live, and they feel that it's something that's done specifically for them. There are productions where musicians have been cut completely, some very large-scale productions, and the audience are cheated. It's as simple as that. If you want to see a musical, the clue is in the title, and it is about the music. That's not to say that stuff can't be streamlined and modernised, and of course there are financial pressures, and we understand that. But basically, the minute you take the live element away from anything, you're not selling what you're claiming you're selling.
I also think from the point of an on-stage energy, I think there's nothing, you cannot replace the feel of a live band behind you. And I think for actors in this show that sing and dance the whole way through this show and they do not leave the stage, even when it comes to some instances where we're not on stage and we're not on the bandstand because of space implications and we can just be slightly more remote, that changes the energy entirely. If you can't feel a kick drum coming from a drummer and a live saxophone coming across that stage, that energy of the show completely changes. And if we weren't to be here at all, I just think it's completely cheating the idea of what Richard O'Brien and a rock and roll show is. It's an energy that comes behind it. And actually it's so joyous up on that bandstand that you can feel that it's 5 musicians, not just playing what's in front of them. They're being musicians. They're implementing their own textures and their own taste and their own little nibbles of what they do as musicians and what made them famous. And we all have so much fun. We celebrate what makes us all unique musicians and why we're up there. And we listen to each other and we go, God, that was an amazing solo. It's so different. And it will be different every time. And you can feel the love from the cast to the backstage crew to the musicians up there and from the audience. And like Greg said, we stand up for our bow and we feel just as much of this show as you do if you were a cast on stage. It's such a massive part to have a live band in a show like this.
And we owe it to the cast. I mean, how can we possibly expect them to perform if we're not?
Yeah.
This is a small company. This is, we haven't got sort of 40 dancers and a kickline chorus and 20 booth singers and all the rest of it. Everyone has to be a part of this. That's what makes it special. The audience feel they know us. So 50 years on, here we still are. The Rocky Horror Show is really special to so many people. Richard wrote it back in 1973 at the Royal Court with basically a completely blank canvas. He was told to create something, and this is what he's done, and he's created this wonderfully inclusive piece that perhaps people who didn't really know how to fit into a slightly more conservative society than we live in now suddenly felt welcomed. He allowed people to experience things they've never experienced, and he made public things that were taboo. Now, I think a lot of what he set out to create is still very valid now. And when you combine that with the fact that the story's brilliantly eccentric, you've got a man trapped in a freezer with a chainsaw. I mean, the story's crazy. The music's brilliant. It's fast-paced, and our audience, literally goes from 100 to 7. You know, everybody can get something out of this show. You can either come to watch it because it's fun, or you can come to watch it because you think, I think like that, or I've lived like that, and I never realised that it was okay to. Whatever it may be, everyone is welcome here, and there's really not many shows that are designed to make that happen. Some do by default, but that was actually his intention.
I think it's just total escapism, and I think there's so much openness about this show. And for me as a gay man, I think it's such I find it so hard and unbelievable that this was written 50 years ago. A show can be this accepting of anyone who walks into the building, anyone who walks onto the stage, and this show's whole mantra is about being yourself, and everyone can be whoever they want to be, and it doesn't matter. And I think if there's a show that's brought that across everything that's happened over the last 50 years, and is still bringing people in of all shapes, all ages, all nationalities, all sizes, and they feel so happy and so themselves walking into this building, I think it's a right that it should be on the stage as much as it is, because everyone should be able to walk into a theatre and just be able to escape from anything that's outside the doors. And I think this is the ultimate experience of a show for that. And you could be having any sort of day and it will change your day for the better. But for me, you know, I'm used to shows that are set up in a way that it's the same every night. It really isn't. Our speed and our energy is also based on the audience. If they join in, they give an energy over to us based on how they are, and it can change everything. And there's such a relationship from the stage to the auditorium that you can't help but leave, even when you've done it 500 times and go, I've literally had the best night. It doesn't feel like a job. It feels like we're just sharing a new story with someone that hasn't heard it again every day.
And it's a bit like the circus has come to town. You know, in Barnum's day, you know, you can see people when the audience arrive all dressed up. You know, people who aren't coming to the show just completely go, except they go, oh, the Rocky Horror Show's in town. You know, it's now become part of people's lives, even if they're not coming to see the show. It's completely normal to see men wearing their suspenders and high heels and you know, top hats and gold capes. You know, nobody questions it anymore, which is, you know, I think Richard's greatest gift that he could possibly have given theatre, to be honest.
Yeah.
So this, unlike any other show, is a gig. That's what it feels like. You're getting up there with your mates, and you're doing a gig, you know. And this has always been a show I felt about having 5 soloists. We've got an absolutely stunning band here, who are all very accomplished soloists in their own right. And to get those 5 people together and just basically have a blast. A lot of our music is just chord sheets.
Yeah.
And in fact, when Richard Hartley, who did the original orchestrations, used to go out to new productions, he would say to musicians, you know what to play. You know, rather than if you're doing some very detailed Sondheim or something like that. There are other shows like it. Hair's very like it, I think, because it's the same sort of vibe. But yeah, it's pretty unique, really.
I think it keeps it alive as well. You know, it was very, very eye-opening for me that I've been conducting bands for so many years to come into this and suddenly overwork it. And our fantastic drummer Al Cox just goes to me, you're part of the band now. It's much cooler than that. And actually just to sit back and relax into it and go, actually, I'm just playing a bit of rock and roll with my mates. And that's exactly what it is. And I think that's the best way to describe the show. You're just playing a bit of rock and roll with your mates, and it becomes a gig, and we celebrate every single person's solo. And there's a point at the show, in every song, where it becomes, oh, this is Al's section, this is the sax section, this is the keys section. And it's something different every night, and it keeps it alive for us and the audience that come to it 8 times a week.
Yeah.
Some audience come to it more than we do.
Yeah.